school kind of luncheons. We did one yesterday at St. Mary's Law School, and they had a couple of law students come up to us saying they're from Nueces County and they want to go back and work at the PD office. So it was pretty
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great
Cool.
to hear. I love that.
cool kind of luncheon. We did one yesterday at St. Mary's Law School. Here.
I'll make this camera work a little better. Guess that's as good as it's going to get. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to call roll the Honorable Sharon Keller,
Here.
Mr. Alex Bunnan. He's here. Mr. Alex Bunnan.
Hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah.
The Honorable Valerie Covey. The Honorable Brandon Creighton. The Honorable Richard Evans. Mr. Gonzalo Rios.
Here.
The Honorable Nathan Hecht. The Honorable Missy Maderi.
Here.
The Honorable Nicole Collier. The Honorable Reggie Smith. The Honorable Sherry Raddick.
Here.
The Honorable Vivian Torres.
Here.
The Honorable Judge John Whitmire. Judge, we have quorum.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to jump right into this. First of all, thank you all for attending. I know this isn't on your regular schedule, but I think it's important for us to try to talk over this proposal before it goes any further. So this is the time where we're going to consider whether we as a body think that placing family representation program with TIDC is a good idea. And the legislature is going to do what it wants, but it would be good for us to talk now, I think, about whether we think it's a bad idea, whether we think it's a good idea, and specifically about issues that might come up so that we can speak as a body when the legislature, and I'm assuming they will, asks us what we think about various legislative proposals. So I've come up with a few things that kind of start the conversation that will or might have a bearing on whether this is a proposal is a good idea to put family representation appointment with TIDC. And you all may have thought of others, but and I've already said I'm in favor of it. I am in favor of it. I think it's a good idea. I think it makes sense. And I think the fact that Crystal was able to do the report that she did after gathering the data kind of shows that it's a good fit for us. But nevertheless, it really is a big deal. So one of the things that, and I don't expect this meeting to take very long, by the way, but one of the things is funding. So indigent defense is up to what, 300 million a year, Jeff?
Yeah, it took a slight dip during the pandemic, but we think that in 2022, it'll probably hit 300 million again.
So roughly 300 million. And family representation, we know now from the data that Crystal collected, was about $66 million. And that doesn't include, there were a few counties that didn't report, but I'm taking that as kind of a given as to the relative size of cost. And I don't know what the legislature plans to do or whether they've thought about funding, but it's possible that we will be in a position at some point where TIDC gets funded and we split up the money between criminal indigent defense and family representation. And I think we can do that. I don't really think it's a problem, but I just want us to be aware that up till now, our mission is going to be different, and not necessarily in a bad way, but I don't see us treating indigent defense as the main thing and family representation as a side issue. And I think the longer that we did them together, it's going to become more taken for granted that these are both of our missions and one doesn't predominate over the other, which is also a big deal because we've been indigent defense for 20 years now. So that's another thing I wanted to just raise as a possible issue, not in a bad way. Staffing could be an issue. I mean, I hope that if the legislature gives us this responsibility, they provide for staffing, and I think they will, but it might be that we have the staff we have and have to split up duties. And I'm not sure also that we would necessarily be looking for the same things in staff that we hired for I think we wouldn't, for family representation purposes as for indigent defense. Because I know that I talked to Crystal and Jeff a few days ago, and this is all pretty new to me. I don't know the details. I know more because Crystal was very helpful, but it's not something that I have a lot of familiarity with. And I'm glad that Crystal does. Another thing is under the initial proposal, as I pointed out, 2 members were going to be added to the commission, and they were going to be non-judges. And I think this was just total oversight, but that would give control of the commission and that means to indigent defense statewide, to non-judges. So I think that's something that we probably don't want to happen. I think when the task force was created, that was a big deal. And I think the judges around the state would seriously object to a commission that took away from the judges the authority to oversee indigent defense statewide and make decisions about that. So that's just something to keep an eye on. I mean, all those things are just something to keep an eye on. And I can stop here if anybody wants to comment.
I'll just say that I agree with you on the majority being judges. Because I think that was the foundation of the TIDC or whatever it was called before. And now it would be moving in a different direction that we would not be able to understand the consequences of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Another thing that struck me, and I talked to Crystal and Jeff about this, and apparently I was not seeing the big picture, but I thought that the primary impetus for this new program was that the counties were just getting overwhelmed with the cost, and they wanted state help in paying for appointments of counsel. And that's true, but it's not the only problem that the program is supposed to address. So apparently, when the task force was created, it was all about adequate counsel or having good counsel. There were a lot of stories in the press then and a lot of concern that the attorneys that were being appointed were not doing a good job for their clients. Apparently, that's also one of the issues on family representation, that I guess there's not a lot of data, and it's hard to come up with data on quality of counsel anyway, but I think that is one of the concerns that the legislature has for family representation appointments. Even given that, though, I think that, at least from the county's point of view, the big issue is funding. And when we started the task force on indigent defense, we developed short-term goals and long-term goals pretty quickly. And I think and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I mean, this hasn't happened yet, but I don't want to get caught without having talked about it. But I think the short-term goal for family representation should be data collection and funding. And maybe some of the problems that are happening with family representation will be mitigated if there's better funding. And we don't know, but with the task force, we had, I think, $7 million to get out in the first year, and no structure for getting it out, and no formula for deciding who got what. So I think primarily one of the first things we would want to do is come up with a structure for funding, and then go from there as far as other problems or suggestions. Crystal pointed out something to me that I hadn't thought of. With indigent defense in criminal cases, there's not usually a conflict that requires counsel to be appointed. We're talking about public defender office and things like that. And there are some public defender offices that now have a section that does family representation. But there's almost always going to be a conflict between the parties in a family representation case. So counsel, even if we have a public defender's office, counsel is going to have to be provided from somewhere else for the parents or the mother and the father and whoever else is involved. So I guess my point is that we shouldn't assume that what works for indigent defense should necessarily be imposed on family representation issues. They're going to be different in some ways. And at least as far as non-funding issues like quality of counsel, I don't want us to, and I'm really just thinking way far ahead here. I don't want us to impose requirements on council and the counties that is going to make the pool of attorneys decrease. I mean, it's like right now we have an hourly CLE requirement, and the counties have to report various things, and the defense attorneys have to appoint various things. And I think we should always remember to be slow to impose requirements on family representation cases just because they exist in indigent defense. Also, because this is such a big change for us, I think it would be ideal if a member of the commission, along with Jeff, talk to the legislature as the process unfolds. And I don't know how much I haven't talked to Jeff about this, but I know that's what happened when the task force was developed, that Jim and I, even before it was ever created, were aware of what the legislature was doing and what they were proposing. I mean, in a very heavy way we were. So I think that would be ideal if we do that this time too. And also, so there's just more people being aware of what's going on.
Sure, I would definitely welcome that. I think the other, just to build on that, I think we'd want to talk for sure with Megan, and I don't know if everybody's met Lewis, who is the new governmental affairs person at OCA, but kind of figure out what that looks like with OCA and TIDC as well. But I would definitely welcome that as far as legislative conversations.
Yeah, normally I would be so happy and am so happy to turn that over to you, but this is a little different project. Okay, so what do we think in general about the idea of family representation cases being parked with TIDC?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's about time that there was something there for those types of cases beyond just an ad hoc approach by every judge of every court, including associate judges that are like cluster courts and have multiple counties under them. My concern is regarding the budgeting request, because I think that the number, the 66 million, it worries me because you've got all these different approaches on how the fee schedule is set. And quite frankly, having done some of that work, it's grossly underpaid. A lot of these cases, especially when you go into termination, they will go to trial because the parents have nothing to lose except their children. So they're not paying for attorneys, they're not, paying for litigation expenses, and they want their kids back no matter what. So those cases get tried more often than not, and to pay an attorney $2,500 for a week-long trial and all the work that led up to it is really difficult. And I read through the report and I saw what the counties have been reporting, or the ones that did participate, on the fees that they pay out, and it hasn't changed much since I got out of the practice of law a long time ago. So that would be my concern. I don't know what the funding request would be, but I think you've thought it out really, really carefully, Judge Keller, and I agree with all of your comments. But the funding is a concern for me if we're really going to have an impact.
Well, what we do with indigent defense is we leave it up to the local judges to decide on a fee schedule. And even though that means that different jurisdictions can do different things. It really has raised the level of payments to attorneys and the various other requirements of having counsel. So I know I just said we shouldn't adopt everything from indigent defense and move it over family representation, but that might not be a bad idea. And it's a template, something to start with. And this is not our decision, obviously, but I do want to find out whether there's any negative perception of the whole project too.
Not for me.
No, I'll weigh in as well, Judge Keller. I agree. I read the entire report too. I think it's something that TIDC should put under our purview. I think that, I've only been on here since, I don't remember, 15, I think is when I came on, but I wasn't here from the very beginning. But I think that we have to move not slowly, but carefully in regards to how we adopt this under the umbrella of TIDC. And do we run it the same way? Do we run it a different way? Do we have different arms of TIDC that's going to be able to deal with this? So I think it's one of those where it's a new thing, and I wasn't here from the beginning, but I think that we have to be very careful on how we move forward on this. And then, I know you've said, the legislature is going to do what the legislature wants to do, and that's obviously true. But I think also, especially, with PJ stuff, we do this, and OCA does this, you also reach out to a lot of your legislators, and you're kind of, helping them to see what is the best vision for TIDC. And I think TIDC is thought of so highly, and I think that we've done great work. So I think we slowly do this. I mean, not snail's pace, right? But we really, really think about everything that we're going to do. But I think it's a great idea. I mean, I really do.
Okay, sounds good. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, Judge, my office has a large juvenile docket, and many of those kids have CPS cases. So I think anything that puts an umbrella over both of those is a good idea. I think there should be more coordination between those kind of situations.
Well, I think so too. And I think something needs to be done, and probably we're the best ones to do it. I can't see who else is on the meeting because I'm not very good at Zoom meetings. Who else have we not heard from?
We have Chief Justice Raddick, and we have Mr. Gonzalo Rios, and I think we have Mike Ward from Senator Whitmire's office.
Okay, Judge Raddick.
I just, want to repeat what my Derry said, because I think that, first of all, I hope we don't get strapped too much by the legislature. I think they hopefully will give us enough room to do it right. And, but I think it's a great idea too.
Good.
But I think careful is a good idea.
Okay, Mr. Rios, what do you think?
Judge, I do the CPS cases also on a full-time basis. I think it's a totally different animal. I think it's a good idea, but I think we're probably going to go in a totally different direction if we take that on.
Yeah.
As far as being able to deal with those cases versus what the commission does at this point.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that the longer we do it, if we are given this responsibility, the more people are going to kind of forget that it was ever supposed to be starting out about indigent criminal defense. But it's just something to be aware of. And as we go on, if we are assigned this responsibility, I think we can be deliberate about how we address that very issue. But yeah, it's not like having, it's like having two babies. They're both yours. Mr. Ward, did you want to say anything?
The senator's interested in kind of what the commission is moving toward on this. It's an interesting idea. Probably a good idea. There's a lot of issues with this, but I think he's looking for some guidance from the commission on this following this discussion. And so I'm taking notes today to get back with him on.
Okay, good. Jeff or any of the staff, do y'all have something to add?
Yeah, I guess a few things. One, I just want to say thank you, Judge Keller, for putting the meeting together. I mean, so the board members know, the last time this board met was only 2 months ago. But since we met 2 months ago, there have been 2 meetings of the Civil Justice Committee of the Texas Judicial Council and a Texas Judicial Council meeting. So there's just a lot that's happened. So I appreciate taking this time just to stop and think about all this. I think that I've talked to several of our staff members about this. I think we're happy to take this on, assuming, Judge, as you said, that there's sufficient funding and some staffing to do this. And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know what, I don't think we'll really know that until the legislature takes some action. But I think from the staff side, if we had, minimum of 5 or 6 staff devoted this, and some portion of, I'm going to go back to 2 sessions ago, there was a bill that would have created kind of a TIDC analog to do CPS work. And the talk then was about 12 full-time staff and I believe $30 million. I think it's unlikely that the legislature would do that. But I think if we had 5 or 6 staff and maybe 10 million a year or something like that, we really could make a difference in this area. Again, ultimately it's up to the legislature what they do on this. But I think generally on the staff side, we think it's a good thing, as long as, again, as we have funding and staff to support it.
Anybody else? So it sounds like, let me see if I can summarize this. We generally think it's probably a good idea, but we need to be careful about how any legislation is worded. And we need to be careful about not necessarily, we need to be careful about it, recognizing that there are different, even though there are overlaps in what needs to be done, like in data collection, there are going to be differences in family representation and in criminal indigent defense representation. And I kind of wanted to make sure that there was not any totally negative view of this, or, I mean, as far as I knew, everybody here could say, no, this is a bad idea, we don't want to do it. So I wanted to make sure that we were at least somewhat on the same page. And it sounds like even acknowledging the differences and the difference in our mission that would result from this, most of us at least think it's an issue that needs to be addressed by the legislature, and that placing it with us is logical. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't see. Let's see. I think there are more people. Did somebody just join us?
Yeah, Representative
Yeah,
Smith.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add?
Well, Judge, I just came in from a meeting with a client, and I just caught the last of what you said. So quite frankly, I'm a little bit unaware of what we're talking about. I'm sure I may have an opinion about it after I hear some more.
Well, let me do a quick recap, because I want to make sure that I'm not overstating anything too. So we talked about the fact that our mission would change if we take on or if we're responsible for family representation appointments, and that those kinds of appointments have different issues than criminal indigent defense appointments, because number one, there are so many parties that are usually involved. We talked about whether it makes sense for us to do it at all. And I think generally people thought, number one, something needs to be done. Number two, it makes sense to put it with TIDC. And we talked about funding and how it may be that we just get funded and then we decide how much money goes to family representation and how much goes to criminal defense. But we could handle that. Same thing with staffing. We don't know if we're going to have more staff, but we can handle it if we don't. And I think one of the points was that, well, I think I already said this. We don't want to assume that what works for criminal defense is going to work for family representation, and that we should be careful about imposing requirements. And this is all, I mean, I'm just thinking ahead because I don't want to be caught without having y'all's ideas. We should be careful about, as we move forward, not just assuming that what works for indigent defense, for instance, attorneys having to report how many hours they spend on indigent defense, counties having to report appointed counsel, that necessarily will work for family representation, because I don't want the limited number of attorneys that now do this work to just start thinking, this is too much, I'm not going to do it anymore, because that'd be counterproductive. So I think in the short term, our goal should be figuring out how to help the counties with funding. And in the long term, figure out how to improve representation, make things work more smoothly. And as Crystal pointed out in the report, get funding from the federal government, make sure that the counties take advantage of funding from the federal government. So that's kind of what I want. I just wanted to, before it starts getting going in the legislature, to make sure that there was not any, to make sure what everybody thought. And I think it's the reaction so far is, this is a good idea, or it's a good place to put it.
One thing we did say also is that it would be ideal for the judges, the makeup of the board, to be majority judges, so that they are in charge of this new idea.
Yeah, thank you, Judge Raddick. Yeah, that would make a big difference. And I think that judges around the state would be very much opposed to turning over responsibility of oversight of indigent defense, or at least criminal indigent defense, to take it away from the judges. So we need to make sure to keep an eye on what the proposal for any additions to the commission are.
Judge, I apologize. Have there been complaints about the quality of representation in connection with family representation?
That's a very good question, because I didn't know it. I mean, I thought the whole thing was about funding, and Crystal pointed out that there have been complaints, and a lot of it is anecdotal, because it's always going to be anecdotal, because it's hard in any way to measure the quality of counsel for criminal or for family. But yes, that is at least one issue that the new program is supposed to address. And I'm just suggesting that we move that down in priority, because if we help the counties fund this, some of that may go away. Yeah. But yes, that I think funding is, from my point of view, funding is the primary issue, at least from the county's point of view. But there are other problems that have been reported. And Crystal, did you say that the Children's Commission did a couple of studies? What did they turn up?
So the last time the Children's Commission did a survey on legal representation, where they surveyed all of the different people that are involved in the system. And the long story short of the survey, and if anyone here wants to see a copy of it, I can email it to you, but is that there is a real disconnect between what the bench is seeing and what people on the ground are seeing, like foster parents, CASA workers, CPS caseworkers, as far as the quality of representation, basic things like visiting your child client or visiting your adult parent client before hearing, things like that. So there's definitely room for improvement. I will also add the job I had before this. I ran a project called the Family Helpline, where I provided legal information to people about all things CPS. And what came up, a lot of things came up, but one of the frequent issues was people who were having issues with their attorney. Attorneys not calling me back, they don't ask for anything, those kinds of issues. And that's part of why I wanted to come do this job, honestly, was all the stories that I heard from the 4 years working there.
Thanks, Crystal. Any comments from anyone else?
My experience, Judge, on through the years, I've actually been involved in taking appointments here in Grayson County at a local level on family cases, and actually on on indigent, on criminal defense. Been involved in both of them. It's a hugely different scenario, as you understand, with regard to the perspective of the appointed attorney on family law as opposed to the criminal defense part of it. It would be hard to measure what's going on in the family scenario. And I would say this, my experience in a moderately sized county is that the judges end up kind of regulating that based on what they see on a daily basis from certain attorneys. And so, particularly with that ad litem appointment for the child, they usually have go-to guys that they go to. You say, well, I'm going to appoint Mr. Dunn, or I'm going to appoint Mrs. Doe, okay, to handle this. And that's because they have experience with these folks and they know that they'll do the job. Now, maybe in larger counties, I may not be able to speak about that, but I think where it may get really ambiguous is what's going on with the appointment for the parents. And so, and then what further complicates that is that usually CPS is running the ball, right? Or CASA is very involved, hands-on, and what goes on in that case. Now, I've been appointed as some of those before where I really had to get active. And I had to send out discovery to CPS, and we got adverse to CPS. And I was taking depositions and doing all the things you do like you would in a contested family law matter when they're trying to terminate your client, their parental rights. But a lot of times, the average case is just a matter of monitoring the situation with the client, making sure you stay in contact with them, try and stay in contact with CPS, make sure your client's doing everything they're supposed to do in connection with a family plan. But I'm kind of glad to hear that your primary interest is on the funding of it. Clearly, that's an issue, but I just think for us to wade off into the regulation of it and monitoring of it, that would be fairly hairy.
Yeah. Well, at least in the short term, I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be focusing on helping the counties with the cost. But recognizing also that that's kind of an evolving program, and kind of play it by ear to some extent.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge Mr. Rios's comment that this is really going to change our mission, and I think that is doubtless true. But I think we can take it on.
Oh, I want to bring up something, and maybe we don't have to completely lose our mission. Maybe what we do is have it as an umbrella, under the umbrella of TIDC, but have two separate, entities, right? Indigent defense, and then we go into this new thing. It's kind of like, the Texas Judicial Council, right? Under that, you then have the criminal, committee, then you have the civil committee, then you have the access to justice committee. And maybe what we do so that we don't lose that mission, that the TIDC stays whole, but then we have underneath it, one of the arms of it is this new program that we want to go into. I think that if we mix them a lot, I think we are in danger, right, of somebody that's coming in 10 years from now, right? Somebody, a new Missy Mederi, that comes and sits on this panel and trying to figure out what our mission is and what it was in the very beginning. And so that would be my point, is to try to keep them as separate as we can, which would mean the funding is even more important, so that we don't have, Jeff or Megan or Doriana or anybody doing 17 different jobs, like putting on their hat for indigent defense and then putting on their hat for this new procedure that we want to do. So just my 2 cents on that.
No, I agree. And that's kind of how I visualize it, although I haven't really nailed down what I think, but that is how I visualize it too. Megan Lavoie, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want to say I'm here to help in any way that the commission would like me to, and in my capacity as executive director of judicial council. I do think that this is a good idea. I think that there's, if the commission doesn't, it sounds like they think that it should go under TIDC as an arm. But there's other models too out there that the commission could look at as well that other states are doing. And so just wanted to bring that up too.
Thanks. Okay, well, what I'll plan to do then is try to keep informed of what the legislature is doing and make sure that we pass that information on to everyone. Probably try to shrink wrap it a little bit so that you don't just get new legislation every time we turn around, but at least keep you aware of how any proposed legislation is progressing and talk about it as we go. All right, unless anybody else had any closing comments or anything else, I think that this has been very helpful to me. And thank you all very much for coming, and I will see you later.
Thank you.
Hey, Judge Keller,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me
Yes,
just
yes,
jump
yes.
in real quick on that. As
Please.
far as the legislation goes, and here would be my only point on this, and we see it every time. Once the legislative ball starts rolling, it's very hard to stop it. And so I think that we, of course, nobody wants to be inundated with 82 pieces of legislation, right? But if there's something that's in regards to this, I would be happy to, if there's a smaller committee you want to set up, or, I'd be happy to get on, a Zoom call at any time in regards to that, just kind of hash it out. And so, so that we can move it this way or move it that way, depending on what TIDC thinks.
Thank you. You're hired. That's great.
And I'd like
anybody else?
to
Anybody
volunteer.
else?
Yeah, I'll volunteer the rest of the committee.
Okay. Anybody else who wants to be in on this subcommittee, just give us, just